Hi, I'm Jason, a student director here at Fox River, and we have just been going through a series sharing our story, and so that's what I'm here to do, share my story, my faith story. I used to think, actually for a long time, I used to think my story is not really that interesting. No major changes in my life. Like when I was growing up, I was like one of those good kids. I didn't really break the rules. I did my schoolwork. I wasn't the best student, but I did my schoolwork, right? And I was like a good kid. And so when the day came that I said yes to Jesus, there wasn't like this dramatic change in my life. And for many years, into my adulthood, I thought, that's a boring story. Nobody wants to hear that. But as I'm now 41 years old, which is ancient to some of you, but I'm 41 now, and I look back at my life and I actually see how many times God showed up and how many times God protected me and held me in his hands, and I had no idea what he was doing. To tell a little bit about that, my parents divorced when I was about 10 years old, and they went their separate ways, and so I did the living with my dad, living with my mom thing, back and forth. My mom was a heavy drinker. She was dating guys who were drinkers. She married a guy who was a drinker. They were alcoholics. And so my mom, that situation, my mom's house was kind of chaotic. Not great examples to me or my brother. No rules, ever. In fact, when you're young, you think that's cool, but when you get older, you realize they didn't really have rules, which maybe that means they didn't really care. And so that's what I wrestled with my mom. And then at my dad's, my dad worked like 12-hour shifts, and so he'd be working or sleeping, and we didn't see each other a lot. And then later in my high school years, we didn't get along very well, and so I left and lived with my mom. And things are good now with my dad, but when I look back, I see that the relationship with my parents wasn't amazing. It wasn't great, and I didn't have great examples of what it was to be a healthy married couple or healthy parents. In that time, I started attending a youth program at a church in middle school, and that's where I met Jesus. But you hear that part, but what you don't hear is for years, I went to that middle school program, and I hated it. I hated going to this thing. I didn't want to go every week. I hated it. I fought my dad, and he would make me go. And every week, they would teach about this guy, Jesus. And they would teach that he died or something, right? Like he did something amazing that we're supposed to be impressed by. And I remember thinking that all the time, like, this doesn't matter to me. But I heard it somewhere, and I would listen every week. And then one week, God just grabbed a hold of my heart. He opened my heart and my mind, and I actually listened. And I remember the guy who was speaking, talking about Jesus and how he came here and how he chose to die for me because of my sins. And I actually heard it. It was the first time I actually heard it in my heart and my mind. And I remember they did this thing at the end of every message where they're like, if you want to say yes to Jesus today, if you want to welcome him into your heart, just raise your hand. And so I put my hand up. Everybody's head is down, their eyes are closed, right? So I put my hand up, and then I'm like, okay. So I did that. Nobody really saw that. And then they did this really awkward thing where they said, if you raise your hand, even though no one was looking then, if you raise your hand, why don't you get up and walk out into the hall with one of our leaders, our volunteers, and we'll have a chat with you. So then I had another decision to make. If I actually wanted to stand up in front of everybody and let everybody know that I had made this decision, it was awkward. But I remember thinking, this feels real. Like, I don't really know what this all means, but I want to know more. And so I got up, walked out in front. I remember some of the kids looking at me like, no way, can't believe, I thought they were judging me. They probably weren't, but I remember thinking that it was weird and awkward. And they went out in the hall with Mike. Mike was the leader, the adult there, and he sat me down and he talked me through what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus and to follow him and what Jesus did for me. And then we prayed again together, and he answered a few more questions. And then from that moment on, I knew that I had accepted Jesus, right? And I knew that, like, technically I was saved because I put my faith and trust in Jesus as my Savior. But like I said earlier, my life didn't really change, right? I still had the same rocky situations with my parents. I was still a kid who was mostly good. I followed the rules. I went to school. I did my schoolwork. I didn't do anything. I didn't pick on people. I didn't do any of those things. I was still like a good kid. So what happened is for years, I lived my life as this guy who says I believed in Jesus, but I didn't really follow Jesus until I was in my adult years. And I got to this point in my adult life where I had made mistakes. I had made a lot of mistakes, and I'd done things wrong, and I remember sitting in the wake of that. If you've ever made mistakes that had, a ripple effect beyond and it damaged trust in relationships, you know what it feels like to sit in the aftermath of that. And so I was sitting in that, and it was quiet, and then there was a moment where I heard, in my memory it was an audible voice, but I don't think it was. But in my memory I could hear a voice saying, "I'm still here." And that was when everything changed, because I knew that voice was God. I knew after all the mistakes I had made, he was still telling me, "I'm still here." And that was a moment that changed my life forever. And so I can look back at my middle school days and say, yes, I said yes to Jesus there. And that's where I chose to believe in Jesus and what he did for me. But it wasn't until that moment, sitting in the quiet, when I heard God say, "I'm still here," that I chose to follow him. And in the days and weeks after, I made a promise to say yes to whatever he asked me to do. And that took me on a crazy journey to all different places and things and opportunities, which ultimately led to him calling me into ministry and being a youth pastor, and then walking down that path with my family, and exploring schooling and learning from pastors and all these things that I never thought I would ever be doing. But now I'm here at this place at Fox River, and I can see that I'm doing this work that he called me to. And sometimes I am able to look back and reflect on, how did I get to this place? And I look at things like the examples of marriage and parenting, and the adults that I had in my life, and I had other rough adult situations, right? I'll just say it like that, where they weren't the best examples. And by all accounts, I should not be a healthy man. I should not be a healthy leader, a healthy pastor, a healthy father or husband. I shouldn't be any of those things, because they weren't modeled for me almost ever. And yet, I look back and I see that God had me in his hands from way back then, even before I believed, and definitely before I followed. And he carried me and protected me from all these things that could have shaped me into something ugly or dysfunctional, something not in line with how he wanted me to live. And I see how he carried me all the way through that to make me who I am today. And that's not to say that I'm perfect, because I'm not. Far from it. When I look at who I could be, I'm in awe of God's power and his love and his presence, and I'm grateful every day for how he's provided, how he's blessed me with an amazing wife and 2 awesome kids, and a job that I love, and getting to work with students and volunteers that are just amazing. And I look at all the blessings, and I know, like, this is a life with Jesus. This is a life abundant, life to the full, which is what he says he wants for us. And so, my original come to Jesus story, not really that interesting. I didn't have a dramatic change. But when I look back on the whole course, and there's still more to come, I see how amazing he is and how he works every day, whether we see him or not. And so if you're one of those people who are like, my story is not really that interesting, think more about how he's impacted your life. What does he do every day? Maybe you can't think of something every day, and that's okay. But where have you seen him working over the course of a season of life, or a school year, or a month, or a week? Where did you see God show up, and how do you think he carried you through that season or span of time? And then you can share that story with people.